Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 227 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined in person by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans. It's almost here.
That's right. We're coming to you on August 10th here, so just a few weeks away now from the start of college football, Dad's favorite time of the year.
Absolutely. And it seems like forever to get here, but then yet it seems like it's here really quick. I don't know how that can happen, but that's the truth.
That's the God's honest truth. All right. Well, we've got a lot planned for two different podcasts today. This first one is going to be focused more on the national news that's been going on in the world of college football. We last did a podcast back on June 14th. And so obviously a lot's happened since then. So we'll be going into some of that on this podcast. And then on our next one for episode 228, we'll be going over the Nebraska-specific conversations and the start of fall camp and all that good stuff.
Yep, it's going to get back into the mode.
That's right. And for those who may be listening to us for the first time, we are a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And we've got to stick with our tradition and open up a cold beverage here. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Traverse City. I got myself a Labatt Blue Light.
All right, and I have a Yuengling Light as well. So we're both drinking the light beers today.
Yes. And I don't get to drink this one in California, so I always like to have it when I'm here.
That's right. It's an old standby here in Michigan, and now with Yuengling opening up, their access to Michigan, we can have and enjoy Yuengling, which is a good beer as well.
Yes. All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Here we go, son.
Yes. So to kick things off, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off with our previous podcast episode, or I guess it would have been 225 was our previous podcast where we talked national back in June. And at the time, the college football world was abuzz with the Brendan Sorsby situation and all the chaos that was going on there. And when we recorded last, the state of affairs was that Brendan and Texas Tech were like doubling down. They weren't going to budge on, playing Brendan in the upcoming fall season. And the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, had released his letter where he was warning about sanctioning the Big 12 institutions, or basically warning the Big 12 that there would be consequences if they sanctioned Texas Tech, as the Big 12 was talking about doing. About liability for antitrust and things like that. And then the day after that, the Oklahoma, Kansas, and Utah attorney generals all submitted their own letters, basically on the opposite side of Ken Paxton, saying, well, we're going to get involved with you, Texas, if you do that. Right. So that, we know that Paxton did that to try to help out his buddy, the chancellor of Texas Tech and everything.
Right.
But it kind of backfired. It did not go over well in the court of public opinion.
Right.
And a few days later, the Big 12 themselves filed a federal suit against both Texas Tech and Paxton, basically saying that, your claims won't hold up in court. And, you're trying to bully us here.
Right.
We are within our rights to sanction a member of our organization who's broken our rules. And so then the day after that, after Big 12 did the lawsuit, Texas Tech had a internal meeting and decided to back down, basically, and say that Brendan Sorsby wasn't going to play for Texas Tech. And Brendan Sorsby dropped his lawsuit against the NCAA about, getting his extra year of play time. Mostly because I read this interesting ESPN article that was written like July, kind of recapping everything. And they had some insider sources from Texas Tech. And according to this, they were saying that the main reason was because they had that deadline of June 22nd, which was the supplemental draft deadline for the NFL.
Right.
Which was kind of Brendan Sorsby's backup plan if he wasn't going to be able to play in college.
Right.
So then Brendan dropped his petition to play college again, moved forward with the supplemental NFL draft. But the thing is, that supplemental draft hasn't happened in the NFL since 2019, so it's not a normal thing.
No.
And a few days after that, the NFL issued a public letter basically rejecting Brendan Sorsby's appeal to do the supplemental draft, saying that they weren't going to do it. And it had some pretty harsh language in it that I appreciated as somebody who was not a fan of this whole saga. The letter said, your petition does not address these matters, nor does it demonstrate accountability for your conduct or indicate whether or how you would adhere to the league's rules and policies governing the integrity of competition. And he basically goes on to say how, you pushed through, despite what the NCAA said about reneging your eligibility. We don't want you gambling here in the NFL, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. He took no ownership. He didn't acknowledge that he had done anything wrong, basically, really. And
right.
They said, no, we're not going to do this supplemental draft.
Yep. So the whole thing kind of blew up in Sorsby and Texas Tech's face, which did kind of surprise me because at the time when we did the podcast, I was saying, Texas Tech has already doubled and tripled down. It seems like they're in this for the long haul. And in the end, they did kind of give up because of this supplemental draft deadline. But I saw in that article, I forget if it was Texas Tech or somebody on Sorsby's, legal team, but they were kind of saying, in retrospect, maybe we should have done it differently. Maybe we should have fought it out, in the court of law.
Right. Well, but the bottom line is that, he had a particular strategy, and that strategy didn't work, right?
Right.
And he thought clearly that getting into the NFL and through a supplemental draft was an easy second choice, and he discovered that it wasn't, right?
Yes.
Because maybe he would have secured the commitment of a supplemental draft first, and then pursued the legal action with the NCAA, but he kind of went at it in the wrong sequence, maybe.
Yeah, and this is just a nice little wrinkle to add on to everything that I learned doing this research is that the Texas Tech Board of Regents the chair, Cody Campbell, who was at the center of all this, he had donated over $250,000 to Ken Paxton just the day before Paxton sent that letter defending, Sorsby and, attacking the Big 12.
Gotcha.
So
that wasn't a bribe, was it?
No.
Maybe it was.
Yeah, well, Campbell and Paxton were political allies beforehand and everything, clearly. But, it does not help the whiff of corruption. I remember you were pointing out how some of the judges that were, litigating the case were like Texas Tech graduates as well.
Right.
And, so.
Well, and that's the thing is, the problem is that this is now, it's gone from individual incident to trend to epidemic of judges basically misbehaving and utilizing their power at the chair to do things that frankly don't make any sense, right? And establish precedents that is particularly damaging to collegiate athletics. And it's sad because, we went literally decades and decades, I think, without a lot of these rules being challenged, right? NCAA rules, without having the protections of antitrust and such. And now all of a sudden, because these things are all getting tested, the structure and the enforcement by the NCAA has basically gone to zero, right? Like it's almost impossible.
Well, once the pay for play that the NCAA had said was a no-go for so long, once
and
the court
kept
said
amateur
that you can't do that anymore, then all these other dominoes started to fall, right? So, I'm happy with how it all ended up because, Sorsby isn't going to play. He didn't make it in the NFL, so it's a happy ending from our perspective. But it was interesting just to see how this singular event united all of college sports in a way that you don't often see, for sure.
That's
in
true.
Opposition to Texas Tech.
Right. Because that's a line that, even the most ardent supporter of player or athlete rights, many of them couldn't get behind this because it's so fundamental to the core of sports that you not involve the gambling stuff, right?
Right.
And so this was so obvious that they couldn't ignore it.
Right. And then another thing we talked about on this previous podcast was the Protect College Sports Act, which had been proposed by the two senators,
right,
and was, being discussed on the floor and was getting sent around to the conferences, getting feedback back in June. Well, obviously it's been a flurry of activity since then. And just in the past few weeks here, they finally got the Big Ten and the SEC to sign on to the bill, which was kind of the big thing kind of holding it up from progressing further along in the Senate, because they made some changes that the Big Ten, the SEC asked for. The other conferences also pitched in their own amendments and things like that. Some of the big changes for that included that the amount of money, there was an amount of money that it was like if your conference makes this much money, then you can't do any conference realignment, basically. You can't expand further. And that was originally like $1 billion, but it was lowered to $700 million, which basically includes the Power Four, so the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, were all included in that, whereas the original proposal was $1 billion, which was just the Big 10 and the SEC.
Right.
So this was kind of widening it out further. And there's some other interesting stipulations there where you're limited to 19 members, which the Big Ten's currently at 18. And I saw it being mentioned the reason that was 19 was to give an avenue for Notre Dame to easily jump to the Big Ten if they want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and also because they're giving the Big Ten an opportunity to expand. They're just limiting what they. So because
Right.
if they said 18, for example, then.
The Big Ten would be
completely stuck, and that would be maybe considered unconstitutional, right? Like that could be challenged because you're completely eliminating my ability to grow and expand.
And you can still expand beyond that, but any Power 4 team looking to change conferences would be required to operate as an independent program for 5 years before making a move. So you can choose to leave one Power 4 conference for another. Up to 19, I guess.
Yeah. So what's the purpose? What's the logic of that 5 years?
To make it
discourage people from doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think there was also something about how you also had to be within the conference that you're in for like a 5-year period
before you could move.
Either before you can move or before this clause activated.
Oh.
So, like, you have to build up some, if you've been in the conference for more than 5 years, then if you choose to leave after that, then you have to become an independent for 5 years. It was something along those lines.
I see.
But that is, part of the language of the bill now. So it is limiting, what can be done in terms of realignment, trying to avoid like the big super conference being made.
Here's the thing: we're spending all this time talking about those two particular parts of the bill, and in my opinion, neither one of those issues it even needs to be addressed, except for the fact that there are obviously a lot of stakeholders who support this bill and have had influence on how this legislation was put together that are attempting to punish and or limit what the SEC and the Big Ten can do. They're designed to do one thing and one thing only, primarily, and that is limit the Big Ten and SEC's ability to do what they want to do.
Right. Well, though it's not just that. Apparently, the ACC has launched like a formal petition to get that 5-year part removed.
Yeah.
Because they've got schools like Florida State and Miami.
Right.
That may well want to move.
Mm-hmm.
But as of right now, that is the language in the bill. Another important change that was kind of made and established was establishing, you've got your $20-some million for revenue share, right, that currently exists from the other lawsuit, I'm blanking on the name of right now.
Right.
And then on top of that, they established $22.5 million in retention funds for each school as a maximum, as a cap. So basically that includes NIL and everything else. So you have your 20-some million of revenue plus this 22.5 million of NIL and stuff. That's your total.
Right.
But
it ends up being like 48 million total.
Because on top of that 22.5 million, there's an additional 5 million specifically for women's and Olympic sports.
Right. So they put an indication that you have to have
27.5 basically.
Right. But you have to spend at least the 6 million,
5 million,
$5 million on sports other than football and men's basketball. Right. That's bottom line. That's what you've got to do.
Well, yeah. Basically, think of the total as 27.5 million, but 5 million of that has to go to Olympic sports
and Olympic sports
and women's sports.
I gotcha.
Which I think is smart, because if you let it be totally capitalistic, then all the incentive is to push that towards the revenue generating sports that are primarily men's sports. So to give some carve out for the Olympic sports,
I understand,
makes some sense.
Yeah, it makes some sense. Except that is absolutely a number that's going to be litigated till the cows come home. Okay, because what do you think people who advocate for women's sports or Olympic sports are going to do?
Well, they're going to try to.
They're going to advocate that number's way too low, and much like Title IX, it should be equal. So therefore, the amount of money made available to the men's athletes should be equal to the amount of money that's made available for female athletes in the collegiate experience. So, and that's an argument that, frankly, based on precedents, I think could hold a lot of water. Now, the arguments against that, of course, have to do with revenue generating versus non-revenue generating, but there's a ton of information out there to say, hey, none of this is about making money, guys. You start going down that path, you're opening up all kinds of other doors, legal and otherwise, that are a problem, right? So I think establishing the number in this piece of legislation, even though I understand the good intention of it, is actually, a what do you call it when you kind of put a automatic bomb in the middle of something to make sure that it can be
like a mine
blown up. Yeah, you know what I mean, like in a circuit design, like or a trigger, a built-in death sentence, basically.
Right.
I think that is a horrible idea, not because at its face, it's not a good idea to encourage it, but because it will lead to a ton of litigation, and frankly, then we'll end up with a law that requires us to give a bunch more money to women's and Olympic sports that are non-revenue generating that hardly anybody goes to watch, right? And that's just stupid.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but we already have the previous lawsuit, which led to the direct revenue share, which currently isn't divided equally between like men and female sports.
Correct, it is not.
And there hasn't been a massive Title IX litigation about that.
Right.
And this is about NIL and things above and beyond that revenue generating. This other 27.5 million.
I understand.
So I feels like if somebody was going to bring that lawsuit, they would target the first chunk of money that's directly from the school first.
I guarantee you that was coming, but the fact that there wasn't a specification, that's the reason why it wasn't immediately addressed. As soon as you put a number on that, it's a problem, in my opinion. So
right, House versus NCAA.
Right,
that's the big previous lawsuit.
Right.
Right. Well, so yeah, we'll see what comes of that.
So far, these changes that you're talking about don't get to the nitty and gritty of why I think the bill even had any value. None of this stuff that you've talked about.
Well, no. The
limit.
The cap on spending is a big one.
That is a big one. But it doesn't cap. It really doesn't. Okay. Well, they say it's capping, but it's not going to cap. Okay. What it says is, okay, we're going to be able to come up with 27.5 million of NIL money that's basically pay for play.
Right.
Okay, but there's going to be NIL beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's going to be NIL beyond that, and an athlete is going to come to them and say, "Wait a minute, this year I was able to get, and I've become so popular. I'm going to use Harper Murray as an example, okay, because she right now would be considered one of the top, marketable athletes in any collegiate sport. She was just named that by an organization, okay.
Wow.
So even among men, right? I mean, she's number one. So, she, let's say, in this example, Nebraska is at whatever the limit is, okay, for their revenue share and their NIL, okay, and she comes to the University of Nebraska and says, hey, Adidas wants to hire me, and they're willing to pay me $3 million a year because I'm going to develop my own, line of sports apparel.
Right.
Okay, and market it as mine with Adidas. You're not going to be able to stop her from doing that. Okay, she'll file a lawsuit as fast as lightning. To say that you can't put that artificial limit on NIL because that's a legitimate NIL. Okay.
All right. Well,
versus the NIL that is frankly pay for play. So
right.
So there are going to be a million ways where they're going to be able to squeeze that balloon and get NIL around that. Okay. Now, going through the House commission that was created by the House settlement, which is supposed to evaluate all these NIL deals.
Right. The
again,
CSC.
That's not been addressed. Still impossible. No way they're going to have enough lawyers and throughput to be able to do this in a timely fashion. So that's not addressed.
Right. Right. So your point is, if it's legitimately like, Adidas reach out to me, Harper Murray, separate from Nebraska or anything else,
right.
I can prove that, then
right.
I can be paid for that beyond
right.
what I'm getting through the university.
Right. I'm just not going through the university.
So
then everybody's going to do that. You're going to find those third-party external things, etc., and it's just going to keep climbing, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. That total right now was like $48.5 million total.
Right.
Right? That's the amount of money that most are speculating. Of course, this is all speculation because no one knows for sure, except maybe the university itself, that is already where Ohio State and
right.
University of Texas are. They're already spending that amount of money. Okay? Where, teams like Nebraska are probably somewhere between, 28 and 35 or $37 million, maybe. I think 37's absurdly high. I think Nebraska's probably somewhere in the 30s. Okay? So we're already at almost a $15 to $20 million disadvantage to the most expensive rosters in football.
Right.
Okay? That's just football.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I don't see how any of this, even if it passes, would actually address what needs to be addressed is a very different set of circumstances.
But correct me if I'm wrong. But part of the whole deal of this with the bill is that it creates some antitrust protections for the NCAA, to
right.
help enforce all these rules and stuff.
Right.
So with the backing of Congress behind it and what's it called? Like
subpoena
subpoena power, right? And discovery. That's always been the thing with the NCAA, right? Mm-hmm. Is they do these investigations, but they don't have that force behind them.
Right. Right.
But with this law and this antitrust protection, now if they caught Alabama, like you say, wiring money through a third party, connection
calling
or whatever
NIL,
to pay their
right.
star quarterback or whatever beyond the NIL limits. Now, if the NCAA caught them doing that, they would have more teeth behind them
That's
to
true.
actually punish Alabama.
Well, and I would have to have somebody actually explain to me how that's actually going to work. Okay,
right?
That I'd have to be confident that is going to actually create that framework without collective bargaining,
right?
And employees. In my opinion, all this is for naught until the NCAA accepts the fact that these athletes are employees of the university that are making money in a profit center for the university. Now, granted, it can be a 501(c) type thing, or not 501(c), but a non-profit organization structure so that all the money has to be contributed to the university. They're not posting profits to stockholders or whatever. Although that is also on the table here a little bit, because people are already starting to do that, right? Looking at third-party investment organizations. I mean, the Big Ten investigated it. But the bottom line is, I don't want any of that stuff. What we need is to acknowledge that these athletes are employees, make them employees, create an organization, a union, that then negotiates on behalf of the athletes with the NCAA, or whatever body they want to create, and then those two groups come to terms. Once they come to terms, now these limits and stuff, they have teeth. Okay? Because now we have a set of rules that both sides have agreed to, and that have, built-in increments for cost and growth and all that, that would be manageable, right? But even in those cases, they're starting to find out NBA's getting exposed for having all kinds of stuff that went around their salary caps, okay? Where they were giving people, equity positions in companies, in third-party situations, so that they would accept a lower compensation from the team, so that they could get another player, and build a super roster, right?
Right.
So, with all that going on, we already have all this information. We already know how this is going to work. It has to be employees, union, collective bargaining. Without that, I think all this stuff makes it worse.
Okay. Well, the other big kind of concession for the Big Ten and the SEC was making it clear in the wording that the whole thing about pooling media rights, right, which is about, pooling the media rights for all the conferences into one big pile,
and then dividing it evenly, supposedly,
is truly voluntary. It was a little vague in the first draft, but they made it clear that it's voluntary, so that the Big Ten, the SEC, don't have to participate in that. So that's a big reason why they did sign on. And part of the whole background of all this is that the Senate and Congress had the August recess coming up, where they take a break for a month, come back in September, and the proponents of the bill were trying to kind of rush it through to at least get voted on in the Senate. So I guess it had more momentum behind it, or wasn't being scrutinized as much, because when you get to September, the midterms are coming up,
and the season has started.
Other things, the season started.
The athletic season for college sports has started.
So, because the Big Ten, the SEC did kind of sign on last minute, it was making some progress through the Senate in the last week of August. But
last week of July, you mean?
I'm sorry, the last week of July, beginning of August.
Right.
We were already starting to see some of the things you'd expect from politicians, right? Like certain groups coming out in opposition to the bill.
Right.
Several Republican senators filed objections or amendments to the legislation, to please their constituents. Labor unions getting involved, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So, from what I've seen, people say it is already kind of in the Senate's agenda to vote on it in September. So, it is going to be voted on. But in terms of its likelihood of moving through the Senate and to the House, that seems to be less likely now.
Right.
Because it needs to go through the Senate, needs to go through the House, then the president needs to sign it, which Trump has expressed his support for the bill. So that part, at least, would happen if it made it through Congress.
And so every senator or congressman, representative, when their turn to vote on this comes, one of the things they're going to do, literally on the day of the vote, is they're going to say, hey, okay, with all the changes that have now been made, because as you mentioned, there's going to be changes, are you still in support of this, Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12? Do you guys still like this? And I think it's going to get so muddied and crappy that they're going to be like, no, we can no longer stand behind this, because these protect. Why are we even talking about suggesting pooling money when clearly the two of the most powerful conferences in the country have zero interest in doing that? Okay, why is that even in the legislation?
Right.
Because they want it. That's why. Because they want to pool that money. There's no law against pooling money now. If the ACC and the Big 12 and independents and any other smaller conferences wanted to pool their money right now, there's nothing stopping them. So why does it even have to be mentioned in this legislation?
Right. Well, like you say, it's lawmaking, so it's making concessions on both sides. So you're trying to appeal to the smaller schools and the smaller states while also then trying to get the big boys on board.
I understand. But even mentioning it is unnecessary if you don't have full collective agreement, and they don't.
Right.
So take it out.
Right.
Just remove it. What good does that mention in that bill? What does that do other than set a precedent, or not a precedent, but set a expectation that's going to happen, okay? And we're going to twist your arm. All of a sudden, hey, Big Ten and SEC, your schools are no longer going to accept or be given academic research dollars until you voluntarily agree to share your money on the sports side.
Mm-hmm.
Then magically it happens, right?
Right.
Now they could do that now. I'm not saying... So why have it in the bill? Why clutter this thing up with all this other crap? It's like most bills. It's getting way too complicated, and it's not even addressing... they could hit a bullet points and hit the 4 or 5 things. The whole thing about roster stability, right? Not letting people jump every damn time the portal opens.
Right, and it does have that.
Right. So there's some restrictions there. That's the stuff that's valuable to me. That's the stuff that's valuable to the athletic departments. There's like 5 things, and that's all they have to do. But they're hanging so much crap around this tree that it's going to fall over on its own weight.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll keep an eye on that when the Senate comes back in September. They'll vote on it, and we'll talk about that at the time. But I've already seen discussion that the conferences are starting to think about Plan B. Like, okay, what's our fallback plan if this doesn't go through? Because it seems more than likely that it won't.
It's not gonna. No.
Right.
And I hope they finally get serious about what I just said. The whole collective bargaining thing. That's the only path to addressing this now that they've opened the box of NIL.
Right. And then just here in the past 10 days or so, we had another new lawsuit to throw chaos into the situation of college football as if we didn't already have enough, which is that a Colorado district judge granted a class action lawsuit, or there was a class action lawsuit filed, and she granted an injunction for athletes who graduated high school in 2022 to have a 5th year of eligibility this year because the NCAA has officially adopted their rule about issuing the 5th year eligibility that was intended by the NCAA to start for fall 2027 athletes. So next year's group of athletes. But these basically students sued saying, well, now that this rule has changed, I should be granted it now, for my own 5th year of eligibility, because I redshirted, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. That was on August 1st. Now, it only applies to players from last year, so you had to have played on the team last year, and you can't have entered the portal, so you need to have been on the team's roster, when your time ended, basically, in 2025. But also, if you do bring on one of these 5th year seniors, you can't break the 105-man roster limit. That was something that was initially a little confused, but they clarified that. So you still can't go over 105. Of course, the NCAA has appealed the ruling, and I'm sure they're trying to fast track it for before the season starts, because this needs to be sorted out quickly if it's going to be a thing or not. But we're already seeing, one of Indiana's best defensive players is coming back to the team. Somebody from Washington is coming back. Things like that.
There's going to be, I'll call it a full handful, or 2 of players that are going to do this in football. But the timing of this all playing out makes it particularly tough for football players, and I think is going to limit the number of football players
and volleyball
players that actually take that up. However, basketball and baseball, spring sports, all those winter and spring sports, I think you're going to see more of a significant impact in those sports because they have some time to actually go through this thing, right? Go through the process. I think the whole thing is stupid, and I'm really hopeful, and I think the NCAA has a pretty strong argument for winning this case. I think the legislator the judge out in Colorado should be removed from the bench for stupidity. Okay, she should, because it's a terrible ruling. It's a terrible ruling, and it's way too easy for the judge to just look at it purely based on, when they do injunctions, is there irreparable harm going to be affected to this group that's brought the suit? And as long as the answer is yes to that, they kind of ignore everything else. And that to me is stupid. I think there should be a reasonableness factor that should play into how any judge arrives at these injunctions. And it sure doesn't look like it. It looks like they answer simply that question. And if you can answer that question, that I'm going to be harmed by not being able to have this eligibility, because I run the risk of losing, any NIL and revenue share that I might have been able to obtain, and I'm harmed because I only got 4 years of eligibility, and now because the NCAA's magically changed their mind and now they want to give everybody 5 years of eligibility, then I should be able to get it. No, it's kind of arbitrary. We drew the line at 2027. We grandfathered the 2026 seniors, so we already went backwards a year from the timing of this legislation. That seems reasonable. It seems like the NCAA did their due diligence to make this a reasonable approach. Where I would be critical of the NCAA is in twofold. One, in the midst of the chaos that we already have going on in NCAA athletics, why would you introduce another bomb in the middle of the room, right? This is a major change. Now, I actually think it's a good change, and it's intended to save the NCAA litigation and make things much clearer for interpretation and judging and all that, right? Because you're just going to eliminate all the exceptions. And so I love it. I actually think it's great. But then they kept the roster limits. They didn't allow for adjustment to roster limits. In some sports, I'll use volleyball as an example again, because that's what we talk about a lot on this podcast. Most of the NCAA schools have already extended offers to athletes that are 2028. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that means that now, with this additional year of eligibility that we're giving all this year's seniors, that's going to influence next year's team, 2027, and the next year's team, 2028, right? So it's already disrupting people that have been given a commitment from an institution that, hey, yes, we want you to join our athletic team, right? Mm-hmm. To me, they should have given those sports a runway in which they could have exceeded the roster limit based on the fact that we didn't inform them of this new rule as official, because it didn't exist until this day. Therefore, this window has to be open for 2 years or something like that. They didn't do that. So it's just logic, basic stuff like that they don't do, that just drives me crazy. And they make their job harder.
Right. Well, we know that part of their motivation for that was that they already did do that because of the whole COVID year thing. And we finally, here in 2026, have gone past all that. And all those players have graduated now. So we kind of finally had a clean slate there.
Right.
So I think they didn't want to, repeat that again.
Right.
But like you say, not only do they have the 2026 players being grandfathered in, now if this decision holds, they got to do it for the 2025 seniors as well.
Yep.
Which just adds even more stress to that,
Exactly. For the individual institutes and for the individual institutions, money-wise and things like that, whether it's an extension of beyond the roster or not, it's still a complication. But it frustrates me that they can't, I think, figure this out a little more simply. And frankly, even though it's a good idea, they probably should have waited a year or two to let the House settlement settle, right? And maybe this Save America Sports Act settle before they addressed this issue. Because I actually think the legislation to go to 5 for 5 or age-based eligibility is a good piece of decision on its basic face, right? It's good for college sports, I think. But it will permanently affect all kinds of stuff. What people aren't talking about yet, but is going to become a conversation piece, is think about basketball that has like 15 or 16 scholarships, okay? Mm-hmm. And they used to be dividing those 15 or 16 scholarships among 4 years, basically, right? So you do the math, and that's like 4 a year, right? Now you have 5 years of eligibility of guys playing, because before, you might have some 5-year guys, but they were chosen to not play a year, right? They were purposely forced onto the sidelines for a year, whether it was because of an injury or because they redshirted for development. Now they all have this eligibility, so now you're not. Now that 16 is divided by 5 instead of 4.
Well,
okay,
but
and you're taking athletes now from both ends of the spectrum. Those that are in the pot of current collegiate athletes through the portal, and freshmen coming out of high school into their freshman year. So that opportunity of scholarships coming, being available for incoming high school seniors into their freshman year, it was already being greatly diminished because of the portal, right? Now, instead of getting the 4 kids per year, 4 scholarships, 4 freshmen,
right?
Okay, now it's already dropped probably to 2 from 4 because you want to leave a couple open for grabbing somebody from the portal,
right? Someone with proven experience.
And then you add this 5 versus 4 dynamic, and so now it's down to maybe 1.6 or 1.5. So I mean, it's going to, in my opinion, lead to some coaches in some sports simply making the decision that I am going to stop investing money in freshmen. Right? I'm not going to recruit high school kids, and I'm just going to go to the portal every year and do the best I can. I'm not going to spend my money on evaluating those freshmen until they get to college, right? I mean, I'll spend some, but I'm not going to have the huge network that I currently have, right? Imagine the amount of money that a sports team could do, especially in football, to get rid of that department, so to speak, or reallocate that resource to focus on all the existing collegiate athletes and doing research about how likely they are to go into the portal, and maybe even start doing some underhanded things to encourage them to go into the portal. I mean, there's going to be a whole swing that's going to happen because of this, and it's going to hurt a lot of sports.
Well, so 2 things on that. One, we should say up front that our numbers there in terms of the actual specific roster numbers are probably not correct, because all of the sports did get the roster increase, right, when they went from 85 to 105 in football, but stopped the walk-ons.
Right.
I know with basketball and volleyball, they also increased the overall roster size a little bit.
Correct.
It wasn't a lot.
No, it was a lot in volleyball. It was a little bit in basketball, but it was a lot in volleyball.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's 18 now instead of 16.
It's 18 instead of 12 in volleyball. It was 12 scholarships before, and now the roster limit is 18. So that's a big
point.
Jump.
Is you have a little bit more roster size to deal with in basketball, but you have these other pressures that you discussed.
Right.
B, with what you discussed about, just going to the portal, I think that might be doable, like you say, in some of these sports with smaller teams like basketball or maybe volleyball.
Right.
With football, I think that would be a massive gamble.
It would.
Because if you go to the portal and you strike out, like we've struck it out, in Nebraska or whatever, and you've got no freshmen, potential people in your back pocket, you're really screwed.
You would always want to have some developmental activity. My whole point in stating that so exaggeratedly is to say that it's about focus and resources.
Right.
And you have teams that have already made the decision. I mean, they're getting 20 portal kids a year.
Right.
15 to 20 portal kids every year. And now, of course, you're losing kids to the portal too. So some of that is just replacement.
Swap.
Right, swap. And I agree with you that the roster limits did expand the number of potential scholarships available for high school freshmen. I'm just telling you that the performance on the field is already demonstrating that getting old and staying old has never been more important.
Right.
And you do that by primarily getting people from the portal and people that have already proven that they can play collegiately at whatever sport they're doing. So just the whole focus on the incoming high school senior, I think, is already being demonstrated that it's diminishing. And 3 or 4 years from now, they're going to look back and say, oh, gee, we didn't really intend for that to be the case, but that's what's happened. That's my prediction.
Like both Indiana and Miami, our two national championship teams from last year were both two of the oldest teams in college football in terms of how old their players were.
Average age of their players.
Right. So in this scenario, then you're describing if I'm a, not a superstar high school senior, let's say, but I'm good, I'm talented.
You're talented enough that in past years you would have been being recruited for a collegiate scholarship.
Well, a collegiate scholarship at a Power 4 school or an elite Power 4 school.
Right.
Maybe now, instead of being recruited by the elite Power 4 school, I'm being recruited by the lower half of the Power 4 instead.
Right.
And I'm going to go there, do well, and they'll notice me.
Right.
And then I'll transfer to Ohio State.
Or I'll go to a junior college, or I'll go to, a Division II school or a Division III school, whatever, and then be a star at that level, and then after demonstrating something, put myself into the portal and try to get on with a bigger program.
Which, that sort of system could work in kind of a lower division to a higher division, kind of moving up the ladder sort of thing, if the current rules stay in place where you have unlimited transfers.
Right.
But with the Protect College Sports Act, you get one free transfer, and then from there you have to sit out a year.
Yeah, you lose a year of eligibility.
So you're not going to be able to...
But now you have 5 to lose instead of 4. From 5 to 4. So, some players will look at that and say, well, my intention is to be in the league anyway. I'm not going to use all 4 years or whatever. And where's the academics fall in all of this?
Well, you're right. That's a whole other question.
It is. Exactly.
All right. And then our last topic for today on the national side of things is just kind of a general conversation that's been happening, especially with the media days, right? We've had the SEC media days. We've had the Big Ten media days come and go now. There's been a lot of discussion about the Big Ten versus the SEC, who are clearly kind of the two top dogs right now, and whereas it has been the SEC kind of on top in terms of perception in the college football world for a long time now. We've had the Big Ten win the national championship for 3 years in a row now, been doing well against the SEC in the playoff games, in bowl games. So the narratives started to kind of shift, and we've talked about that, how the Big Ten is the best conference right now. And you saw at the media days some kind of, back and forth on both sides from coaches being asked those questions by the media, who, of course, want the salacious quotes about that sort of thing.
They want the controversy.
Yeah. So you had Nick Saban saying, in terms of the Big Ten versus the SEC, that doesn't mean they're better than us, meaning the Big Ten, and that doesn't mean that just because you win the championship, you have a better conference. It just means you have one better team. Then on the other hand, you have Kurt Cignetti being asked at Big Ten Media Days about all this, talking about the Big Ten. He said, "We don't run a hype machine here in the Midwest. We believe that everything's earned, not given. When we fall short, we say we fell short. We don't cry a river, whine, and complain, all right? And that's why we're the best." So, now obviously we're not unbiased on this debate because you all know where we lie on that discussion.
Well, yes, but the fundamental on this whole issue is, I think the next period of years will start to give you insight into which teams and which conference maybe has better talent, better depth, as well as winning championships, right? And the talent question, I think, is still the SEC is the best conference from a talent perspective, okay? And the NFL draft tends to, bear that out. right? In terms of the actual number of athletes that are drafted in the high rounds and all that sort of stuff. But my argument is more fundamental into how our current sport in college football is managed / governed with regard to how the decisions are made about who gets to participate in the playoff, right? How those teams are selected, and the arguments that are made by the SEC, which are supported by their 4-letter network ally and TV partner. That's where the thing falls off the rails, okay? And now that they have finally agreed to the 9 games, which I believe if they redid that vote today, the SEC would never vote to go to 9 games. They would have stayed at 8 and kept doing what they had previously been doing, okay? They did it only because they thought that it was something that they kind of had to do, right, to stay in the mix. But the reality is that the history, I think, very clearly demonstrates that the selection committee, no matter who was on it, tended to be overly influenced by win-loss record, and even people who do rankings. So it's a human thing. Even people who are involved in voting on the coaches poll or the media poll, right? Yeah. Any of those people, they cannot help themselves because they just can't know everything about all those teams, right?
Yeah.
And if they know it at one point in time, they forget it, right? Right? I mean, seriously, like as a coach, okay, I knew that team really well because I prepped for them and I played them. So I know their personnel really well. But now, 6 weeks later, I've prepped for 6 other football teams. My memories about their strengths and weaknesses and how good of a football team they really were, they start to fade a little bit, right? And then there's obviously politics that enter into this, and people do things that are not objective. They are absolutely subjective. And so, I mean, the SEC is recognizing and whining precipitously or continuously about this whole 9-game schedule and the fact that everybody should play at least one Power 4 school in their non-conference slate, and I'm like, that is such sour grapes for the conference that has not yet even played one season with 9 conference games. Right. They haven't even gotten through their first season with 9 conference games, and they're already whining about it. Okay, the fact is that they have played penny ante schools almost always in the South or in their own home stadiums, where they had all kinds of advantages to make sure that they got 4 guaranteed wins. Okay, and more so than the other conferences. I would put them 4th on the list of playing consistently competitive teams outside their comfort zone in areas of the country that they're not familiar with at times of the year when that weather and stuff can become a factor, right? So I have no patience for their whininess, okay? No patience at all. I think it's a bunch of crap. And even this voting top 25 that just came out, our first season's top 25 is out, and preseason.
Right.
And the number of SEC schools that are ranked highly, in my opinion, is overweighted, right? Mm-hmm. And it's because they have literally decades of history of records that were better than other conferences who were playing 9 games while they were playing 8. And I think that now as this all plays out, it's going to be really interesting to see if ESPN's going to be able to continue to press their hand on the scale in favor of the SEC, or whether that's going to become harder because those guys might start having more losses, start losing more players because they're having to play one more conference game where they're going to have an injury. You know, I've said before, you know, it's kind of you pretty much have to plan that one of your top 44 players, at least, you're going to lose every game. At least one of your top 44. Maybe the number's closer to 2. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But so now you have another Power 4 school, or actually SEC caliber school that you have to play. You're going to lose a starter or 2. You know, maybe not for the season, but for a few games and stuff. And that stuff snowballs. and it causes problems that they haven't experienced for decades.
Right.
So, no patience.
No patience, he says. Well, the part I find a little ironic, with what Nick Saban was saying about how the Big Ten just has one team that's better than all of us because they've won the championship, when you can make the argument that the SEC wasn't that much stronger than the Big Ten and the other conferences in the past 15 years or so.
That's right.
It was just that Alabama and Georgia were both very good and kind of carrying the conference.
I agree. Nick Saban's comment was almost hypocritical from that standpoint.
Right. As
the
Alabama
he was trying to
coach.
point out he was trying to point out the depth of the league when he won multiple national championships during a period of time where his team and maybe Georgia, like you say, were head and shoulders better than almost everyone else in the league. Right? So they didn't have depth to compete with him, right? Where there were almost always in the Big Ten, 3 and 4 teams that were comparable to one another. Now, maybe none of them were national championship caliber, right? We weren't winning national championships, but we had depth of good football teams.
Right. Well, especially once both conferences expanded, right? SEC added Texas and Oklahoma.
Right.
We added USC, Oregon,
Washington.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So now both conferences definitely have the depth at the top, and I think you're seeing, more of that parity, right? Because nobody has emerged as the clear dominant player in the SEC. I mean, Georgia kind of is right now. They've won it for the past couple of years, but not the same as they were before. And then in the Big Ten, right, we just saw Indiana surprise everybody. We've had the other Michigan
and Ohio State. We've had 3 different teams win championships in the last 3 years.
Right.
Now they've also had multiple teams win national championships, so it's not like it's all been Alabama, but there was a period of time not that long ago where it was kind of all Alabama and occasionally Georgia. Right? And there wasn't much
and
being
the only
heard from anybody else.
Was Clemson.
Right.
For that period.
Right, at ACC. Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a fun podcast. We're going to be getting in the groove of doing these more often as we get closer to the season. We'll be talking about the wider world of college football as we start getting into the games. I know there's a bunch of good games for week 1 that we'll be talking about, previewing probably on our next podcast that we do later in August. And keep an eye on these bigger picture things. Just today, as we're recording this on August 10th, some of the big wigs are talking about 16 team playoff versus a 24-team playoff. Now, they've already announced that they're not going to be making any concrete decisions on which method to go with or staying with 12. But they're having more conversations today. They're trying to get more details narrowed down on what decision they want to make, because they do have a deadline, I believe, by the end of this year. If they want to make a change for next year, 2027, they need to decide by the end of the year.
Right, because you've got to get contracts for sites and bowl games and all that stuff, and relationships need to be worked out. So they're going to have to come to a decision. And one decision might be to leave it at 12. Obviously, leave it alone. Keep doing what you're doing. Because last year was, by and large, a successful season, right? It was.
Right.
Attendance was good.
We've talked a lot about the playoff things, and the different proposals out there before. And I wouldn't mind sticking with 12 if we adjusted the schedule so we're not going as late into January.
Right.
I think nobody is a fan of that right now.
I would agree that you could do some things that way. And again, I would like to take some decision making out of the hands of the humans in the room, who clearly have demonstrated their inability to be, in my opinion, consistently objective with regard to identifying the 12 teams that should be included.
Right. Well, I would like that too, but that would involve a more elaborate debate and restructuring, which, I don't know if we want to open that box at the moment.
Right.
If we decide to stick with 12, if we go to 16 or 24, then all those discussions are happening, and we'll see. Though the trend seems to be from what I'm reading in the news at least, are leaning towards more committee decision making rather than more automatic qualifiers, which is the opposite of what we want.
What I wanted, and not that I love automatic qualifiers, because then you do tie your hands, and there's more of a risk that you're going to leave somebody who's clearly more deserving out, right? But if the number's large enough, i.e. at 24, that the expectation would be that, in 99% of the years, that's gonna take care of itself. So, but anyway.
Yes. So we'll keep an eye on all that and keep talking about college football here. It's fun to do one in person with you, Dad.
It is.
And we'll go back to our remote setup moving forward here. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can email us at collegefootballthrowdown@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us, or subscribe to us, rather, if you search for College Football Throwdown on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. You can leave us a rating or review there or a comment, and we'll read it out here on the air. We always love hearing feedback from fans. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.